Welcome to the North Central U.S. Climate and Drought Outlook for September, obviously of 2025. Our speaker today is going to be Trent Ford he is the Illinois State Climatologist at the University of Illinois. My name is Doug Cluck. I will be moderating this, I guess you'd say. And just so you know, down at the bottom, you can actually ask questions. There's a Q&A button. Use that Q&A button at the bottom if you have any questions, or even if you have a comment. Use that rather than the chat. We tend to monitor the Q&A a little better than we do the chat one. So at the end, when Trent's done, we'll get into anything you guys want to chat about. So I think that's it. And thanks to the National Drought Mitigation Center for hosting this overall. So, and Tanya Bernard especially. All right, take it away, Trent.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for giving a little bit of time in your afternoon here to talk about climate and drought in the North Central region. As Doug said, my name is Trent Ford. I'm the state climatologist for Illinois, and I'm based here at the U of I in Champaign. All right, so I'm going to hide my floating meeting controls, and then I'm going to say that the general information here to start off with, and this has been a long time collaboration between many federal agencies as well as universities, state agencies as well, including the National Drought Mitigation Center, the Midwest and High Plains Regional Climate Centers, USDA, NOAA, and of course universities like my own at the U of I. You can see the links for access to future and past climate webinars as far as the past recordings there, both at the Midwestern and the High Plains Regional Climate Centers. Doug mentioned open questions at the end, and then just a shout out that October is always one of the longer one of these and most impact or information filled, and it's going to be tag teamed by Laura Edwards of South Dakota State and Brad Rippey of USDA. So I am one person who scolds graduate students that I work with for putting in an outline into talks, but this talk is long enough that I think it needs an outline. Plus, I needed to fit in something to brag about how good Illinois seems to be. We'll see about Indiana this week. But so recent, the outline goes past recent climate conditions. We'll do a summary review of August and summer, what the last 30 days and 60 days looks like, any sort of events, impacts that we've seen. Drought is big, especially here in the Eastern Corn Belt right now. Ag, water, fire, some excessive wetness in some places, some heat, humidity, fire, all that good stuff. And then we'll look at the outlooks from the next 7 days, next 2 to 4 weeks, the rest of fall, a little bit of winter, maybe some La Niña to let the cat out of the bag, and then we'll take all the great questions and comments you all have. All right. So we're going to start with recent climate conditions. Photo here from Morton, the pumpkin capital of the world, and they had their Pumpkin Fest last weekend. And I can say that the pumpkin chili is delicious as always. All right, so August climate review here. These maps are showing color coding by ranking of temperature on the left and precipitation on the right. So focusing on the left first with temperature. Those blue colors, the white colors, indicate that we are cooler than average in August across much of the region. A little bit closer to average around the Great Lakes, warmer west of Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado. I will say, and I'll show this in a slide coming up, that this map is showing average temperature, like daily average temperature. But when we look at our nighttime temperatures, they were actually quite a bit higher because of some of that high humidity, both early and later in the month. We'll look at precipitation. That's where we really see a big east-west difference that's going to be kind of dominating this discussion here today. August was extremely dry in the Eastern Corn Belt, driest August on record in Ohio and Kentucky, third driest in Missouri. And then on the flip side, it was a little bit wetter than normal, and actually quite a bit wetter than normal in South Dakota, as well as in Nebraska and Kansas. So we saw repeat storms moving pretty, in some cases, intense rainfall through the kind of northern central plains, but definitely missing that Eastern Corn Belt area. And so August wrapped up a summer that, again, these maps showing temperature rankings on the left, precipitation rankings by state, temperature rankings, average temperature rankings on the left, nighttime temperature rankings on the right. So when we focus on just the summer statewide average temperature, everywhere you see red was warmer than normal. So it was warmer than average for most of the region. Top 10 warmest summer on record in Ohio, thanks to a pretty warm August that wrapped up everything. But when we look at the right map, those are our nighttime temperatures or average nighttime minimum temperatures between June and August this season. You can definitely see a more coherent pattern. No one had below average nighttime temperatures or overnight temperatures, and several states had extremely high minimum temperatures throughout much of summer. Top 5 highest summer average nighttime temperatures in Iowa and Illinois and Indiana, Kentucky. That's what those big rankings show on that right map. And so, again, it wasn't a summer that was necessarily going to break any records from an average temperature standpoint, but because of that persistent southerly flow bringing in that Gulf moisture, it was persistently humid. And as we know, that higher humidity tends to keep those nighttime temperatures pretty high. And that's definitely we definitely saw throughout the summer this year. Speaking of that humidity, it's like a Carson bit. How humid was it? Well, in fact, when we look at one of the better data sets we have about humidity, in this case, I'm using the dew point temperature, which is probably the best representation of just the effect of humidity. What we see is that going all the way back to the early 1980s from the PRISM data set, that this summer of 2025, for the entire region, had the highest average dew point temperature, and really the only the second time since 1981 that average summer dew point temperature was above 60 degrees. Now, why does that matter? Well, if you live in, especially east of the Mississippi River, but certainly in parts of Iowa and Minnesota, anything above 60 degrees, that's where you start feeling the humidity. If you're out in Colorado and Wyoming, probably anything above 50 degrees, you start feeling it. But no matter what, this was an extremely humid summer. And certainly, as far as our data goes back to the early 80s, the most humid on record. Parts of the central and southern Midwest, especially around the confluence of the Mississippi and the Ohio and the Boot Heel of Missouri, western Kentucky, much of that area spent more than half of their entire summer with a dew point at or above 70 degrees. And 70 degrees, no matter where you're from, is extremely humid, oppressively so. And I don't mean to say that half of the days during summer had a high dew point of 70 degrees. I literally mean half or more of the number of hours in the summer season were at or above 70 degrees, record breaking for most of those areas. So again, just persistent humidity that was the main driver of our overnight temperatures being so high, as well as things like disease pressure and maybe some pollination issues that we'll talk about later on. From a precipitation standpoint, it was a bit more of a mixed bag, I'd say. So the statewide rankings for precipitation on the left, you can see it was a wetter than average summer for every state except Ohio, Kentucky, North Dakota. It was a top 10 wettest summer on record for Iowa and Nebraska. I can't remember. Dennis can just probably shout it out, but I can't remember. July was pretty high as far as Iowa rainfall is concerned. So that was really what pushed, as well as a fairly wet August, pushed that number up to a top 5 wettest on record in Iowa. And then when we break it down by county, as far as June through August precipitation rankings, that's the map on the right. Those really dark green colors, those where we're near record wet in some of those counties. So you can see that border of northeastern South Dakota and western Minnesota. That's where we had several counties where it was a near to record wet summer, as well as some isolated counties in other parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Kansas. So on the flip side of that, you can see that we have some smattering of browns throughout especially the eastern Corn Belt and then the very far western extent of the region. That's where we had a below to much below average precipitation for the summer season. Now, for the eastern Corn Belt, that was really August. Most of that signal was August because of just how stinking dry August was. Okay, so that brings us up to kind of contemporary, where we are now. So I want to show the last 30 days because that differs a bit from August. So these maps are showing on the left total precipitation over the last 30 days and what that 30-day precipitation total, how that compares to kind of our average, what we expect to get. So what we can see here is very wet conditions over the last 30 days throughout much of Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas. and extremely dry conditions for parts of Missouri, Illinois, and into much of the eastern Corn Belt. There are places in Missouri and Illinois that have not seen measurable rain since late July. So when I say extremely dry, I mean completely bone dry. That's something that for this part of the country, we just simply don't see very often. So it has been extremely dry. And again, on the flip side, we've had those heavy rains in parts of South Dakota and Kansas and Minnesota, and a little bit in the UP as well, in Michigan, that have really been the only spots of above average precipitation. Everywhere else has been near normal, especially farther west or east has been quite a bit drier than normal over the last 30 days or so. Again, looking at the entire region here, what I'm showing is these are NOAA's precipitation totals for the whole region, averaged across the whole region between August 1st and September 15th. Now, this data goes back to 1951. And what you can see is that the period between August 1st and September 15th this year was the second driest on record going all the way back to 1951, wetter only than 1976. So, I mean, you can definitely see the departure from where we've been over the last 10 years or so. Extremely dry. Now, if we just go back real quick to this map here, what you can see is if you were to just cut off the region at the western extent of Iowa and Missouri, and look at the western part of the region, you'd say, well, it's probably wetter to near normal. So this signal here since August 1st has been completely driven by the eastern part of the region and just how bone dry it's been. So for a lot of this talk that's remaining here, I'm going to talk about some of the implications of what that's meant for the fact that we've seen such dry conditions going all the way back to the start of August. Um, Sometimes when we have those really dry conditions, we'll see, especially in those bad drought years like 1988 and so on, we'll see the very high temperatures as well. And interestingly, that hasn't been the case here. In fact, much of August was, as I mentioned, a little bit cooler than normal for a lot of the states. So it was one of those cooler, drier periods of time. The maps here are showing average temperatures over the last 30 days as a departure from normal on the left, and then our nighttime temperature departure from normal on the right. So what we've seen is that it's been a little bit warmer than normal over the last 30 days in the northern and western extent of the region, actually a little bit cooler than normal in the eastern part. But our nighttime temperatures on the map on the right show that kind of that dichotomy a little bit more, even more clear, where parts of western Wyoming, western Montana have been 6 to 8 degrees. Our nighttime temperatures have been 6 to 8 degrees above normal, again reflecting some of that humidity as well as high temperatures during the day. Whereas we go to Indiana, Ohio, we're talking about, in some cases, record-breaking low temperatures at night. No doubt, some cooler air moving in, but also that dryness makes it so that when that sun goes down, that low humidity, the lack of evaporation from a very dry soil means that those temperatures can drop really quickly. So those nighttime lows over the last 30 days or so have been much cooler than normal throughout much of the eastern Corn Belt. In fact, I've heard from a lot of people around here in Illinois saying, wow, it's actually quite pleasant at night, which is something we don't often get. But as soon as that sun starts to go down, we see those temperatures drop because there's just a lack of the humidity in the air more recently. So all of these temperatures, what does this mean for growing degree days? The map on the right is showing our growing degree day, modified corn growing degree days across the eastern 2/3 of the region since April 1st. We can see most of the region in the greens and the yellows, the light greens are somewhat to well above average on their growing degree day accumulation. Once we get into parts of eastern Kansas, a little bit in Nebraska, we see that we're a little bit behind average, but for most of the region, we're well ahead of our average growing degree days. I just pulled a county here, Lynn County in Iowa, from the U2U project's corn growing degree day calculator. The red line here, this darker line, is showing our year-to-date growing degree days relative to the bluish line, which is our average. So you can see that we've been ahead of average on growing degree days since the start of May. just because of those persistently high temperatures and especially those nighttime temperatures really pushing up that growing degree day accumulation. So what that's meant is that even in the wetter parts of the region, even though it's taking a little while for that crop to dry down in those wetter parts, we're still ahead of schedule on when we've reached maturity. And certainly in the eastern side of the region where we've been dry recently, we've seen some very, very quick maturity reached, but also some extremely quick dry down across especially our corn and beans. Okay, so I've sort of hinted at drought throughout so far. This is the most recent U.S. drought monitor that was released today, current as of September 16th, which was Tuesday. What this shows is that over 30% of the region is in at least moderate drought. Tale of two droughts here. When we look at the very western extent of the region, that has been in drought for months now. And it has only kind of worsened, but that hasn't really grown east necessarily. So we've seen a lot of severe to extreme drought in the very western extent. The newer drought, I suppose, that's popped up over the last couple of months has been in the east. And I'll show it just in a second of how quickly things have deteriorated. So we have more of the longer term drought in the western region and more serious kind of flash drought in the east. The central, everybody's been wet there, it seems like. So we've seen drought either improve or get completely eliminated over the last few weeks or so in this because of just consistent rainfall from Kansas up through North Dakota. So these are two U.S. drought monitor maps. The left is from July 29th, and the right is from September 16th. So you can see that coming into August, we had a lot of drought across the western extent of the region, some in Nebraska. But the eastern part of the region was virtually untouched. And then we fast forward a few weeks later to now in September 16th, and that whole eastern region is lit up. So just some example of how quickly things deteriorated. Missouri went from 0% drought on July 29th to 62% of the state in D1 and 30% of the state in D2, which is severe drought, in just 7 weeks. And Ohio went from 0% drought in July 29th to 95% of the state of Ohio in at least moderate drought in 4 weeks, which is quite remarkable. And having conversations with folks in all of these states and living in one of these states, we feel like we had been keeping on top of dry conditions, but it had been deteriorating so quickly that it was even hard to to keep up having a once a week kind of drought monitor. And again, I just want to remind the folks here that when we talk about flash drought, oftentimes we talk about prolonged or dry periods, acute kind of dry periods of time that are exacerbated or worsened by really high temperatures and really high evaporative demand. But remember, we didn't have that. The last 30 days, especially in the eastern part of the region, has actually been cooler than normal. In some cases, our nighttime temperature has been record cool. So this is simply driven by the fact that we had some deficits and then all of a sudden shut off the rain for 30 to 40, in some cases 50 days, and the whole area is really dried out quite quickly. Another depiction of drought conditions or just kind of current hydrology conditions is soil moisture. Two different snapshots here. The left showing from the USDA, the subsoil moisture, percent short to very short. The reason I show the subsoil moisture here is because that's what's really feeding our hydrology, the base flow in our streams, as opposed to the topsoil. So wanted to show that. You can see the number above is the percent of that subsoil moisture that's either short to very short. And then the number in the brackets is showing that change from last year. So we can see, for example, Illinois and Missouri, 20 to 21% additional short to very short subsoil moisture versus 2024, versus places like South Dakota and Nebraska, which are minus 16 to 26% less subsoil moisture in that short to very short category. So again, improvement in the Northern Plains from last year, worsening in the east. The right is showing a higher resolution model product, NASA's Sport List product. It definitely shows the dryness in the eastern corn belt. I will say, though, that we may be overdoing the dryness depicted in parts of the Dakotas. I mean, South Dakota's been pretty wet lately, and so this may be overdoing the dryness a little bit, and maybe underdoing the dryness a little bit in southern Indiana as well. But again, just really gives you at least a broader picture of the fact that a lot of the subsoil in this is the top 40 inches, by the way, in the eastern Corn Belt is pretty dry right now. And as I mentioned with that, if we just get a drying out of the topsoil, that's one thing. But once we get those dry signals to penetrate, 20, 30, 40 inches deep in the soil, now we're affecting base flow for our streams. And this is usually a pretty dry time of the year anyway for much of the region. We don't tend to get a ton of rain in September. And so what that means that our streams are often fed this time of the year by that base flow coming out of the ground. And so the fact that we have that dryness penetrating so deep in the eastern Corn Belt means that our streams are really suffering. So the map on the right here is by watershed, the depiction of stream flow in that watershed by sort of like drought categories. The greens to blues are well above average stream flow. You can see even some flooding areas in South Dakota. And then the oranges to reds are showing well below average stream flow. Certainly, we can see that across a lot of Illinois, Michigan, Missouri. Just to put this in context here, we have the Sangamon River, which is actually fed. The headwaters are not too far from me in Champaign. The Sangamon River at Monticello, between Champaign and Decatur, reached no flow for the third time just last week, and that was the third time in the last 115 years of records there. Last time the Sangamon River at Monticello was at no flow was 2012. So very, very dry conditions that have affected our stream flow. On the flip side, the Minnesota River at Montevideo crested at about 16, just over 16 feet on August 21st, which was the highest crest on record for August that we have. And that also goes back about 116, 117 years. So a lot of very wet conditions in that, South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota area, a lot of dry conditions downstream in Illinois, Missouri, and Indiana for sure. So the big rivers, which is always a topic this time of the year as we start to see barge traffic potentially begin to ramp up. The plots on the top here, the left one is showing current conditions at the Ohio River at Cairo, Illinois, there where it meets the Mississippi. We can see that we're right at just below that low flow threshold, but we're still above where we were last year of the Ohio. So that is, I don't know. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. I just say that we're above 2024, but because that 2024 signal there was really affected by how dry last year was in Ohio, the state, that really affected Ohio, the river. So we're again approaching low flow or there on the Ohio, but not quite as dry as we were last year. And then the Mississippi at Memphis is shown on the right. And actually, I'm sorry, I meant to fix this. This is actually the Mississippi River at St. Louis that I'm showing you here, not Memphis. And the reason I wanted to show you St. Louis is because we are not at low flow on the Mississippi at St. Louis or quite close to there yet. And so we're above that 2024 level. When we get down to Memphis, and I don't have that shown here, but south of Cairo, Illinois, that's where the Mississippi meets the Ohio. This time of year, the Ohio usually contributes between 50 to 60% of the flow in the lower Mississippi, south of Cairo, which is where Memphis is. And so when we see that, what we see is that Memphis is actually at that low stage now. So right now, the Ohio is approaching that low stage due to drought. We do expect that to decline through the rest of September. The Mississippi River, the upper Midwest, all that wetness in Minnesota and the Dakotas has kept the Mississippi River at St. Louis above low stage for now. But we do still see some draft restrictions already in place along the Mississippi River south of Cairo because of the lack of that Ohio River input.
Hey, one thing, Trent, we
Yeah.
might mention is this is the typical time of year, if you will, climatologically or hydrologically for the Mississippi to go down. Right?
Yes. This is so when September into October is climatologically it's weird to say climatologically, hydrologically the driest time of the year. We just got done with summer, had a lot of evaporation, precipitation is quite variable, so our stream flow is usually at its lowest this time of year going into October 1st. Before we start to recharge. And so the last few years when we've had these really dry, acute, but dry conditions in Kentucky, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana. That's really wreaked havoc on the Ohio River because this is normally when we're at our lowest. And when you add to that the effect of drought, you can get down to problems quite quickly. On the Missouri River, we have below average runoff that is upstream of Gavin's Point, South Dakota. So that's going to keep those Gavin's Point winter releases to a minimum level. Downstream of Gavin's Point, that's where a lot of some of at least the runoff from some of these bigger storms in South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa of running into. So no real issues there right now. But of course, the drier conditions upstream of Gavin's Point will keep those winter releases to a minimum level. Okay, let's talk about Great Lakes for a little bit. There's not a whole lot remarkable. Everything is remarkable about the Great Lakes, but right now nothing is remarkable about the temperatures and the levels of the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes temperatures, after reaching near record water temperatures in July for some of these lakes, all the lakes are currently near to actually slightly cooler than average, especially Lake Superior, Lake Huron. For lake levels, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and St. Clair are all about 1 to 2 feet below average for mid-September, which, to put it in context, is not a whole lot below average. Lake Superior and Ontario are pretty close to average. So for the Great Lakes Basin, we really haven't seen the recent drought centered over the Great Lakes Basin. It's been a bit south of there. And of course, with the Great Lakes feeding quite a large area, it takes a while for any kind of drought to affect the Great Lakes. So right now, nothing really remarkable about the Great Lakes temperatures or the levels. Okay, so let's switch to some impacts, talking about notable events. And I want to thank the Seymour drought reporter for not only reporting drought conditions in Missouri. Missouri probably does it best of any state in the region, but also showing these pictures. And I pulled this one because of the color contrast between the deep blue sky and the brown, unfortunately, brown pasture was noteworthy, but also quite beautiful. So this was a really interesting, but it also points to really significant pasture conditions in those drought areas. Okay, so focusing on ag impacts here. We have on row crops, we see late season drought stress and some production impacts, especially to soybeans, as we typically think in much of the Corn Belt. July is the month for rain for corn. August tends to be for beans, and because August was so dry in many areas, it wasn't as widespread devastating as some really bad drought years we can think of in memory, but certainly likely had its production impacts. On top of that, it stayed quite dry, and so we've seen very rapid drying across the eastern Corn Belt. Most folks in Illinois, hearing reports from Indiana, are focusing first on harvest of beans, just because they're getting in and seeing that bean moisture is actually at or actually in some cases below ideal conditions. And just to give you an idea, here in Central Illinois, we're still a good week or two away from the typical peak kind of harvest activity, if not 2 to 3 weeks. And I'm seeing a lot of harvest activity out there. Again, just really focusing on beans because it's so dry. When we go north and west in parts of Iowa, the Dakotas, Minnesota, a little bit slower drying, higher humidity. Of course, it's been pretty wet there, so we've seen slower drying in the Dakotas. And then I just also want to mention some agricultural impacts. Southern rust has been very prevalent, not just in Iowa, but I focus on Iowa here because it's been a big southern rust year in Iowa. Remains to be seen what kind of impacts that actually has on production, but that's been something that they've been dealing with up there as well. On pasture conditions, as we expect, and as I showed with that photo, they're deteriorating in Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. We're seeing little to no regrowth after the last cutting, and producers are already feeding hay, which is earlier than normal. Hay stocks are good, and hay prices are reasonable as well, so that's good, but it's never great to see producers having to feed hay this early. And at least in Illinois, we're hearing about producers who are hauling water because of concerns over water quantity, but also water quality. Stock ponds, same thing, are running pretty short in parts of Missouri. And then for specialty crops, we've seen isolated frost damage in South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin. Nothing that's been reported as widespread. But when we get those drier, cooler nights, we don't have to get down to more than maybe 37, 36 degrees at night to get some of that frost damage in some isolated places. And so Sounds like that's a little bit of what happened in those places. And then just hearing from apple producers in Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, they've been irrigating quite a bit more than usual, especially later in the season now, to make up for that, not lake of rainfall. I'd love to have a lake of rainfall, but actually lack of rainfall that we've been having in that area. As far as crop conditions are concerned, these are percent good to excellent corn and beans compared to the change from last year. Again, big difference depending on where you are. For corn, you can see that if you are up in the Northwest or kind of Western, or excuse me, Central Northern Plains, seeing, large in some cases like in Nebraska, double-digit increases in good to excellent corn versus last year. Same thing with Wisconsin. If you go east, you see Illinois is kind of the sore thumb there. 54% good to excellent, 23% less than last year. And that, of course, was effective mostly of drought, but also combined with the very high humidity and nighttime temperatures that may have affected pollination here. For beans, same kind of thing. More good to excellent beans in Nebraska than last year. Kansas, South Dakota, less so in Missouri, Illinois, and Kentucky. And then as far as crop progress is concerned, these two maps showing the percent mature corn on the left, the percent beans dropping leaves on the right. That heat, and I mentioned those growing degree days that have been above average the whole season, especially kind of east of Mississippi. We see that there's a lot of the crops are ahead of normal, or many places in the east. A little bit lagging behind in the west because of that moisture. The harvest numbers for USDA, when these were released a few days ago, 7% corn harvested across the region. That would be right at the 5-year average, although, and 5% beans harvested, which is just a little bit ahead of that 5-year average. Although from what I've seen just the last 3 days here in Central Illinois, those numbers are probably outdated by now too, because folks are really here in the east getting in quickly because of how dry things have been. Pasture's been an issue. I pointed that out. The left map showing pasture range conditions, good to excellent. Again, and then poor to very poor on the right. You can see the greens on the left map in the plains and then the kind of upper Midwest, browns in the south and east. That's the August moisture versus those who didn't get August moisture. And of course, this time of year, pasture really reflects that pretty quickly. And so we've seen those impacts that I've spoken to already. Okay, other kind of drought impacts. Ecology wise, I don't think we've necessarily advanced the drought far enough to really see widespread systemic problems with ecology, but we are seeing trees that are dropping leaves early, seeing that early senescence. And unfortunately, when we do get drought this time of year, we also often have limited fall color. For recreation tourism, there's been some boats removed from docks on some Illinois lakes voluntarily. Nothing mandated yet, just because of noticeable falling levels. Fireworks and other events have been canceled at fairs and festivals across the eastern part of the region, and then we now have burn bans in dozens of counties across. From, I didn't include Missouri here, but from Missouri all the way across to Ohio. For water resources, we've seen municipal water resources from reservoirs in Illinois are dropping quite quickly. And, for those reservoirs that are connected to streams, the streams are actually in worse shape than the reservoirs are. So oftentimes we'll start to get reservoirs that are being depleted, and we look to the streams to replenish them, and they just simply can't right now. So fortunately, it's September and not May, so we're not going into the warm season, but still, we don't really like to see these hydrological impacts any time of the year. And then, of course, I mentioned livestock producers that are hauling water from those municipal wells. Public health, it's weird to think about drought having a public health impact, but it does. And one of the things we've seen very high West Nile virus prevalence across the region. I think South Dakota's really nice dashboard has it in outbreak territory for them. And the mosquito the mosquitoes, I can't remember if it's one or multiple species that carry West Nile. They actually prefer it a little bit on the dry side and quite variable. So when you can get those big flush of rain and then a prolonged dry spell, you get that pooling or ponding of water in places, and that's what that mosquito really thrives on. So it's these types of years. This year, 2013 is another good example where we were wet and then we went dry, where we always see that big spike in West Nile. And then something I want to hit on because I'm going to show the kind of wildland fire maps outlooks here in a second. But one thing I want to hit on is that there right now is a very high risk of field fires as harvest ramps up across the eastern Corn Belt. I talked about how dry those crops are, folks getting in quickly. There's always that field fire risk, but it is extremely high right now in Missouri and Illinois and Indiana and Ohio. So that's just one thing that we're trying to message really hard is just say, make a plan in case you get ignition, make sure your equipment's clean, take that extra couple of hours. You know, it's not going to rain, so take that extra couple of hours to make sure we're prepared for that. Other significant weather impacts, there was some heavy rain and flooding from nearly 10 inches of rain in less than 12 hours in Lincoln County, Kansas. I have the image here of some flooded fields. And then there's been a handful of not like record-breaking, but you know, impactful nonetheless, really heavy rain events that have caused episodic flooding along the James River, Republican River, Big Sioux Rivers in the Dakotas that have caused impacts. We've seen, I mentioned the patchy frost in August and early September. Those impacts have been isolated, but you know, important nonetheless. We've actually seen some sub-freezing temperatures in western North Dakota. I don't think anywhere else so far, but obviously parts of Montana, Wyoming for the elevation. But you know, we'll start talking about that, especially in October. And then severe weather. We've pretty much had a complete lack of severe weather in the eastern Corn Belt. It's been very quiet, but all of our tornadoes went up to North Dakota for the summer. And so we had that big tornado outbreak in North Dakota on September 14th. The exact number is still being figured out, but it's going to be likely well over a dozen tornadoes in one night. Some impacts from that. I show the photo here of some grain bins taking it on from one of those tornadoes. So I think I saw Laura Edwards on. She could probably correct me, but I believe North Dakota is at or very close to kind of year-to-date record number of tornadoes, thanks to in large part this event. Okay, so that's what's happened. Now let's talk about what's happening. The outlooks. This is my favorite time of the year as we move from September to October and theoretically get cooler. We'll see if that actually happens. First thing, precipitation. This is the latest 7-day forecast that was put out this morning from the National Weather Service. More Gulf moisture, you know, for some of you who have been wetter and waiting for your crops to dry down. Not such great news for us here who will like sell our souls for 1/10 of an inch of rain. This is good news. Wetter forecast for the central Midwest. You can see, in fact, some 7-day totals exceeding maybe 3 or 4 inches in parts of southwest Missouri. We'll see if we actually get that. But the point is that the 7-day forecast is more bullish on rain for the eastern Corn Belt than it has been for pretty much since late July. So that's really good. Any precipitation will be welcome from Missouri to Ohio. A drier forecast west, and actually, you know, it sounds like the Dakotas, especially parts of South Dakota, could actually use a little bit of dryness to help with prepare for harvest. So totals, you know, forecasted totals of, you know, 1/4 of an inch to maybe just a little bit less than an inch may not be too bad of a thing for this time of the year. So this is actually pretty good news. When we go west, we're still seeing some forecasted dryness for those longer term drought conditions. They'll have to wait for the snowpack season probably to help with that. All right, so the 8 to 14-day outlook. This takes us through October 1st. Temperature on the left, best chances of warmer than normal everywhere. Everybody gets it. 70 to 80% chance of above average temperature. So that's pretty strong signal in the upper Midwest. Precipitation map on the right over that same time period to wrap up September. Slight chance of wetter than normal conditions in the northern plains, but we see a stronger, drier pattern for the Great Lakes region. So what that means is those drought areas in the east get some rain this week, but it looks like the last week of the month may be a little bit on the dry side as well. There's been some discussion about La Niña. So as part of the El Nino Southern Oscillation, we are in a La Niña watch. There is a 70% likelihood or greater than 70% likelihood of La Niña appearing before the end of the year. You can see that here. That's the blue bar on the chart on the right-hand side. OND means sometime between October and December. When we look at the models, what most models are showing when we take those out to the spring is a weak to moderate La Nina. So not super La Nina, but, you know, weak to moderate can still have impact on our weather. interestingly enough, oftentimes we'll go into La Nina in the fall and carry it through the winter. Actually, the models right now are only showing only a slightly higher than 50-50 chance of, if we develop that La Nina, of persisting it through climatological winter. And you can see those blue bars really start to drop down as we get into late winter, early spring. So right now, it is likely La Nina will develop. We're starting to see the cold tongue, the sea surface temperatures on the right, on the left map is showing that cold tongue sticking out from South Dakota, or South Dakota, good Lord, South America. So 70% chance likely we'll develop that La Nina, but may not stick with us for super long. Okay, so October outlooks, getting into the month. These were just released today. Temperature on the left, leaning warmer than normal across the eastern part of the region. No really strong temperature signal west or north, so equal chances of above and below normal temperatures. And then on the precipitation map, a little bit of a weak, drier signal for parts of Missouri and the Ohio Valley. Some of that is persistence, tend to be dry there, that kind of persistence of a dry signal that we've seen. Equal chances of above and below normal precipitation north and west. So again, the 7-day forecast looks really good for the corn. I should say, it looks better than it has for a long time to get some rain in the Ohio Valley, these parts of the Ohio Valley, but it doesn't look like there's any kind of like long-term persistent wet pattern that's going to set up for October. So. And then the last outlook here is the seasonal outlook. This is October through December. Temperature on the left, precipitation on the right. Again, keeping warmer than normal in most of the region. Equal chances right along the Canadian border, and I'll kind of hint at why that may be here in a second. And then on the right, seasonal precipitation outlook. Again, a little bit slightly drier, far southwest, Kansas, Nebraska, part of Missouri, equal chances for most of the other region. Look at the above average here, precipitation for western Montana. This is October through December, so some of this could be that snowpack, which would be a welcome sign of some of those drought areas. So we'll have to see what that holds in the next 3 months. Okay, I mentioned the wildland fire outlooks, and these are mostly white maps for much of the region. In fact, I don't think I see any of the areas in our region that are marked with red as above normal wildland fire potential outlook. So that's to say that this is good news. We're not set up with conditions where there's a ton of concern about wildland fire. I will, again, though, contrast this with this is not really considering field fires from agriculture. And so in those areas that have been very dry, we do have a very high risk of field fires moving forward. So we'll want to make sure that we're, again, taking precautions there. One thing I will say real quick that we've benefited from is a lack of really strong winds. We've had very still weather patterns. And so the wind can really wreak havoc this time of the year for dust perspective as well as fire perspective. And so far through the month of September, it's been, not very windy. So that's actually been a benefit. Okay, so I want to hit on these before I kind of wrap up. I've mentioned leaning La Nina, 70% chance developing before December or before the end of December. What does that mean? What does La Nina mean? Well, what I'm showing you here is for every climate division across the U.S., the average temperature anomalies on the left, so where we were departure from kind of average, and precipitation on the right, in all La Nina events since 1990. And just to put in here, they probably should even be bigger, but it says not forecast. These are just past conditions. All right. The past is not necessarily a great forecast for the future or what it is right now, but just to say what the tendency is for La Nina falls. Big warm signal across the whole region. Every single climate division in the region has an above average temperature signal for past La Nina events, at least in the last 30 some odd years. And as far as precipitation, below average precipitation for much of the Mid-South, leaking up into the Ohio Valley and even up to the Great Lakes. So what we've seen so far in September tends to hold for this as well, that warmer, drier than normal conditions. Now, again, this isn't a forecast for October and November, but just to say that this is what kind of a tendency of conditions that we've seen in some past La Niñas. When we take that to December and February, though, notice, and I'm going to flip here, not too fast to give anybody a seizure, but just flip between fall, winter, fall, winter. Notice that temperature pattern flips for the northern part of the region. And where we go from above normal temperatures in the fall during La Nina falls to actually below normal temperature signal in the wintertime, December through February. Same thing where we're very dry in the fall in the Ohio Valley, we have a little bit of a muted wet signal during La Nina winters. So again, not a forecast, but just give you an idea for what we've seen from some La Ninas of past and maybe what some of that La Nina of fixtures or impact may have on some of these outlooks. Okay, the drought outlook, it's really not surprising given that there's not a huge wet signal in the eastern Corn Belt in October or really through November. So that means that the dark browns here, both in the very western extent of the region as well as the eastern part of the region is mostly a drought persists. I will say that we do have a little bit of a signal here that drought removal, possibly in western Montana. Remember, this is a seasonal drought outlook, so this is for September through the end of the year, and we had that kind of above average precipitation signal later in the season in that western Montana region, which is probably what's leading there. But I think the big signal here is that it's likely that we're going to keep the drought in the east, at least for the time being. All right, so summary of everything that I've talked about. Extremely dry in August, eastern and southern Midwest. A lot of the eastern Corn Belt's moderate to severe drought. Very wet conditions in the Dakotas, parts of Minnesota called episodic flooding. Harvest will likely progress very quickly in much of the region, but with that very high field fire risk in the eastern Corn Belt. Pasture problems, I say again, because folks, especially from Missouri through Ohio, just can't seem to catch a break, and there's continued stress for livestock producers there because of those just continued pasture problems. Low levels in the Ohio River for the fourth consecutive fall. Really something how it's become more of a signal. And I will say that all of the forecasts and outlooks that we've had for drier conditions in the Ohio do not take into account any kind of tropical activity. Obviously, you'd be forgiven if you forgot that it's hurricane season because it's been quite quiet in the Atlantic, but those forecasts for drier conditions don't really take that into account. So something we really haven't seen a lot of in recent years is those remnants of hurricanes coming through. We did see it with Helene last year, which actually broke a drought in Ohio, but nothing really spinning up right now. And of course, as the Ohio River continues to fall, could affect the Mississippi River south of Cairo. Early diminished fall color in parts of the eastern part of the region, senescence in those drought areas. Want to watch those lag stress in the young trees. Already hearing about some trees, some of those young trees showing really significant stress in Chicago and other urban areas as well as a response to that drought. For the outlooks, best rain chances in weeks over the next 7 days from Missouri to Ohio. Bit drier out in the Dakotas, which can actually be a good thing to help dry down to prepare for harvest. There, and then the outlooks lean dry for the last week of the month. There's not really a strong October precipitation signal. And beyond that, outlooks continue to show above normal temperatures for most of the region, especially east, where we've been dry in October through December. Last bit here is La Nina is expected to form before the end of the year. It will likely, if it does form, it'll likely be a weak to moderate La Nina. It may persist through winter, but doesn't look like a super La Nina sort of condition. Okay, so lots of further information here. Another beautiful image from Northeast Wisconsin of the Northern Lights there that were on display. And then I'll wrap up here with, again, a call for questions, some contacts for folks that you can reach out to with questions or anything like that. And I leave you with a map of the Midwestern Regional Climate Center's average date of our first 32-degree fall freeze. So with that, I'll turn it over to Doug and say thanks again.
Thanks, Trent. And I just want to hit on what folks may first. We'll go to what folks may want to hear about for next month. We're going to do a wrap up like we have done for the last 12 or whatever years, several years, a wrap up of sort of the end of year harvest numbers. So that's why Brad Rippey from USDA is going to come in and talk about that. Then we'll have our usual summation of all the other things that go on in the climate across the region. This will be October 16th of next month. So I want to get that in just so people understood it. It may go a teeny bit longer than 1 hour. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, so Trent, do you want to talk about the lack of hurricanes this year? And I read I just read an article, so I'm not an expert on it, but in general, do you want to say anything about that and impacts on the Midwest or North Central part of the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, so I had heard, and Doug, since you just read an article, you correct me that there's been quite a bit of shear in that area that we have sort of the what is it, the nursery or whatever of Atlantic hurricanes that has really not been beneficial for kind of the frequent hurricane formation or persistence of those tropical disturbances to form into our tropical storms or hurricanes. Yeah, like I mentioned, this is something we saw last year. When we had significant hurricane problems in the southeast, but until Helene came through, we really hadn't seen a lot of remnants of those tropical storms. And something that it's been bugging me, I want to look into here once we can get out of this drought period here is, I think we underestimate how important tropical storms are to the hydroclimate of the very southern eastern parts of this region, the Ohio Valley especially. And when we don't get those remnants of hurricanes, it doesn't necessarily mean drought in the region, but when we're already in drought, the lack of that hurricane activity can actually make it so that drought may persist or intensify. So,
Yeah.
um,
So
yeah.
yeah, two things. One, shear in the east, western part of the basin, and shear meaning hurricanes like to form under high pressure without a lot of subtropical winds blowing them around. Okay, so when that happens, they get sheared apart. They basically break apart or can't form. That's a very simplistic way of looking at it. The other thing, and that's sort of as you get closer to the U.S., that was the issue. That has been the issue with formation and sustaining any kind of tropical system. The eastern part of the Atlantic has been inundated with Saharan dust and dry air. So it's two different factors that have caused less hurricanes to happen and tropical storms and all that stuff. I'm sure there's lots of other things and it's very complex, but those are the big things. Um, let's see. We also let's see. Yeah, and you're sort of the expert on this, Trent. So Chip from Kentucky makes that comment about a lake of rainfall is what we had in Kentucky and Southern Illinois the first half of the year, and now it's flipped. You want to say anything about those fast flips and the prevalence of those fast flips? Are they becoming more common?
Yeah, it's funny. We did handful of studies a couple of years ago across the region, looking at flips between either flooding to drought or drought to flooding, kind of back and forth, and they are becoming more common, particularly so in the region that is really experienced this year. So much of Missouri, the southern half of Illinois, much of southern Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, that has seeing an increasing trend over the last 70, 80 years of that variability that makes it so that we flip very quickly from extremely wet to extremely dry. And in some ways, it makes it more challenging to prepare, to take action to kind of mitigate impacts, versus if you were just getting drier or getting wetter at kind of the same rate. But when you flip back and forth, it's really problematic, and certainly this year has been an example of that kind of rapid transition, that increased variability.
And is that is there any can you tie any of that to the fact that temperatures are warmer,
Oh, you
especially
mean
yeah, especially the drying part from wet to dry.
yes. So the that is it's a good question. So yes and no. It's one thing. It's hard enough to take an extreme event like, let's say, a drought and or an increase in the frequency of something like drought or floods and say, oh, there's a climate change signal to it. Well, when you're talking about a flip between two events, it makes it even harder. So we did
Yeah.
our darndest, but yes, there is that signal that the way that we're seeing both the warming trend, which means that we can evaporate more, go more quickly, as well as there's a dynamic trend. So the way the atmosphere actually moves is also, there's a signal that makes it so that we can have these not prolonged, but these 4 to 6 week periods of time of very extreme dryness or very extreme wetness that and the kind of rapid change between them that we just hadn't seen before. When we look at projections of our climate into the future, we see the same kind of signal of those things becoming more frequent by mid to late century.
And not to get into the weeds, but I'm going to do it slightly with you, Trent. And there's several people, several scientists out there that like to talk about prolonged periods of either cold or wet or dry, and they're saying that, and I'm going to say meridional with you, but a lot more air masses that get stuck in a place. And this is partially due to slower movement. Again, this is a climate change impact, slower movement of the big waves around the world. Does this fit into your some of the
Yeah.
research you've done or not?
No, it's a good point. The idea is
No, we
that
don't know.
if you're right, yeah, the jet stream is moving more slowly around the whole world. That when we get high pressure that causes drought, low pressure cutoffs that cause lots of heavy rain and floods, that those things stick around longer, and we can. That's the theory.
Yeah,
It seems to be more complicated than that, as it
yeah,
always is.
yeah.
So it's hard to say like that's exactly what's causing it. But certainly we see those signals of slowing, but I wouldn't necessarily say that that's the real reason that we're seeing these kind of trends. The only reason.
Trent trends, we'll call them from now on.
There you go.
So uh, last thing I want to mention is that next month the official winter outlook will come out from NOAA, and of course we'll report that. Trent gave you his 2 cents, and really, we can give you pretty much what they're probably going to say in terms of La Nina and some of the maps that Trent showed you already. He gave you a hint of cooler to the north, warmer to the south, drier to the south, maybe a little wetter to the north and west. But I think we'll get more into the weeds on that next month. Again, October 16th. All right. Anything else from Trent or the other folks in the peanut gallery that would like to comment? Okay. And I think on that note, I want to say thank you to everybody who came. We appreciate you having you and your questions and interest. And some of the help that you've provided to us. So we appreciate all of that. Thanks again to the National Drought Mitigation Center and Tanya for helping us out. Have a great month. May it get a little cooler and wetter for most of you, not everybody.